Welcome to week 3. Activism and ethics. One of the more interesting weeks we'll have together, especially if you think about some of the examples of activism in our culture today. Perhaps some of you have experience with activism, either on the organization side, the organization that the activism is focused on, or perhaps you've been an activist yourself. Regardless, I think you'll learn a lot about ethics through the material we'll explore this week as it relates to activism. Alright, our primary text, Fitzpatrick, in chapter 4, there's a quote that I want to share. Many situations seem to demonstrate how organizations were caught off guard and ended up reacting to a situation rather than proactively anticipating and managing activism for the long-term best interest of the organization and the publics involved. So let's unpack this a little bit. Number one, they reacted. They were not proactive. One of the things that we like about this program, and more specifically about this course as it relates to ethics, is that we want you to be proactive strategic communicators. You have an idea, and if you don't, I guarantee you people within your organization have a good idea about what issues you should be prepared to communicate. So do your part and be proactive. Secondly, the long-term best interest of the organization and the publics. So let's talk long-term. Oftentimes, especially when we're reactive, it's all about what's happening today and how do we address the situation today instead of taking a long-term view for the organization, your primary responsibility. But also, and this is a third point I want to make from this quote, it's not just about your organization. You have a responsibility to your publics as well. So be proactive, think long-term, and be holistic in terms of not just the organization, but also others affected by your organization, what some people refer to as the public or publics. Okay, there's another quote I like that talks about activist publics should communicate with the organizations they target in the same manner that these activists would prefer to be treated. Conversely, or just as true actually, organizations and activist groups are engaged in good faith efforts to negotiate genuine solutions to problems. It's not about getting your emotions up, not about proving who's right or wrong. It's about how do we come together to solve these problems. A personal example, when I was the spokesperson for the U.S. Pacific Fleet stationed in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, we had the Secretary of the Navy visit. And we had a visit aboard one of the ships, and then one of my responsibilities was to do a press conference set up a press conference for the Secretary of the Navy right on the pier. We walked from the pier to his awaiting driver and vehicle. Well, on the way between the press conference and the vehicle, a distance of maybe 200 or 300 yards, there were a group of protesters that the police were keeping back, and they were protesting some of the tests that we were doing off the coast of Hawaii. And some people believe that those tests, underwater tests, could harm marine mammals. And so they were protesting that. And so the Secretary of the Navy started walking towards them. I'm like, Mr. Secretary, we need to go this way. And he's like, no, I want to talk to them. And so, of course, he's the Secretary of the Navy. At the time I was a lieutenant. And so when the Secretary wants to go, you follow. And he went over there and very non-defensively said, may I ask what you're protesting? And one of the members spoke up and said, we feel like what the Navy is doing is harming our animals. That's something that we can't abide by, and we feel like they need protection. And so he engaged into a very short dialogue and said, look, I can't solve this now, but I'd like to learn more about your organization, and I'd like to learn more about the concerns that you have. Because remember, nobody loves the environment, the ocean environment, more than sailors, because that's our home. And so he took that away. And then we got in the vehicle and proceeded on. And so I learned a valuable lesson. It wasn't about the short term. It wasn't about him trying to be right and prove someone else wrong. He was willing to listen and listen to those people that were affected, find that common ground. Okay, one of our articles this week from Vail, it's a study that examines a growing trend of activists who use the targeted organization's social media sites to propagate campaign messages opposing the target organization practices. And I'll use this point to make another point. Make sure that if you are responsible for communication within your organization, that you monitor your social media platforms. What's more, make sure that you are monitoring what is being said about your organization on social media platforms. Now, you can do that if you're in a smaller organization, which I've been in before. Maybe I'm the one responsible and it's me, myself, and I, or perhaps one or two other people. You still have a responsibility to monitor those social media sites. If you're in a larger organization, which I've been in before, and you have teams of people who monitor that, and you spend some money on some tools to monitor social media about your organization. Regardless of how you do it, just make sure it's done. You don't want the first time you find out that somebody's posted something about you on Twitter, or even posted something on your Facebook page or some other social media site. You don't want that first call to be from a reporter who has seen it and it's way too late. So you want to know it first, and then you can decide what you want to do about it. One of the things you may decide to do is let it go. In fact, your authors talk about that organizations may determine it's not prudent to respond to every criticism or activist threat. When I worked for the Navy Recruiting Command, we would often share stories about individuals as it related to, Hispanic Heritage Month, or Women's History Month, or Asian Pacific Islander Month. All those important parts of the calendar year that we use in order to share stories that are related. And most of the comments were very positive, of course, but once in a while you would get somebody that would come on and especially if we had a Spanish speaker or had some information in Spanish, they might come on, we're in America, we need to speak English, or those kinds of things that are not helpful, kind of off topic. My advice to the advertising firm at the time, or whoever else was responsible for social media, ignore the haters, right? There's a self-correcting nature in social media, and other people will jump on there and say, this person may have come to this country as an immigrant, may not have spoken English. Now he or she obviously does speak English. If you're in the military, they deserve our respect, something like that. And so rather than the organization going against this person and giving them more credibility than, quite frankly, they deserve, other people will come to that person's defense, or sometimes even to the organization's defense. So just be aware of that. Sometimes doing nothing and just monitoring the situation is your best course of action. The most important thing is to be ready. Right? So know what you need to in terms of the issues that are out there. Have a plan to respond if that's the right thing to do, and then be flexible, right? Because it's just like in battle. The war plan doesn't last past the first contact with the enemy. Right? That's one thing we learn in combat. You have a great battle plan, but guess what? You make contact with the enemy, and that plan is going to have to change. Right? The same thing is true in when you're developing your contingency plans or your emergency response plans, or whatever name your organization uses. Okay, last article that we'll look at this week is from Weaver, and there's an organization called Mothers Against Genetic Engineering, and the author looks at how that group influenced public opinion and corporate behavior. And they did it by creating a position of irreconcilable differences between its own position and that of the New Zealand government. The authors call this approach a carnivalesque political protest campaign. Kind of an interesting description. But what's even more interesting is that it was similar to the medieval carnival folks' humor, which is based on the peculiar and difficult language of laughing people. So it's kind of a unique way to look at this, and I thought kind of an interesting way to look at this, and the way that group used that carnivalesque type political communication to get their point across, and it actually resulted in change. Okay, so that's some thoughts for the week. Most important thoughts, which I'll leave you every week, are stay ahead with all your assignments, stay engaged in the discussion board, and most importantly, enjoy your time of learning.